So last October, K-Rock put on a Halloween costume contest and had some bands come out and play. And about a week prior to that date, I had finally sat down to watch Captain America's First Avenger. And during that movie, I noticed that he had airborne jump pants on, he had leggings, and essentially every item that I had in my inventory for my reenacting. So I decided for the K-Rock event that's coming up, why not just go as Captain America? And since I'm a reenactor, I already had plenty of M1 helmets laying around my garage, and so I grabbed the one that I probably wouldn't use in reenacting, and I decided to paint it up. I went to the craft store and I found this great paint. It's called Uber Matte Lake Blue. The one downside to it was that it was fast drying, and I didn't realize this at the time, and so I was unable to put the corking on the helmet to give the actual World War II look. Whenever you look at a World War II M1 helmet, it has a rough texture to it to cut down on the glare. You'll see in these photos the helmet has the glare because the paint was so fast drying that I wasn't able to apply the corking afterwards. Next, I needed a large stencil of the letter A to use to apply the white paint to the front of the helmet. I had gone to a bunch of craft stores but was unable to find a stencil the right size that I needed to apply to my helmet, so I decided just to go onto the internet, print up a letter A, get out a ruler, X-Acto knife, and get to cutting. The paint I chose to use on the letter A on the front of the helmet was basically white acrylic model paint that you would use when assembling a model car or an airplane or a boat. I think I probably applied about 3 to 4 coats of that white acrylic paint. And a nice finish to that I was not expecting is when it dried, that acrylic paint and all the layers made the A pop off of the surface of the M1 helmet and just gave it a nice little effect. At this point, everything was going well with the helmet project, and I had known in advance that I was going to need to replace the chin straps because, as I said, this was a late 80s, early 90s helmet, and so it had a modern day blue webbing chin strap with a modern day clasp on it, which wasn't going to work for this project. And so I simply went to atthefront.com, ordered some World War II era M1 helmet chin straps, and sewed them on. Now I know my purists out there are watching this video and they're just dying to make a comment about how I'm not using the correct airborne liner with this helmet. Captain America wore an airborne helmet in the movie, I'm aware of this, but at the time I did not have an airborne liner. So I was simply going to use my original Westinghouse liner that I had that goes to my front seam swivel bailed helmet. And that is why the chin straps that I am using on this helmet do not have the snaps on them, because the liner does not have these snaps to accommodate them. Now, one of the most important parts and the most time-consuming and difficult parts of this project was the shield. Captain America needed his shield. Now, I've seen photos where some people do the Captain America Bucky's Rescue impression, and they just go out and get the round shield and they call it a life. But I'm putting this much effort and detail and authenticity of this uniform, I wanted to have the right shield. So I put a little research into this, and I figured out that MDF was the way to go. It was easy to work with, it's lightweight, and most importantly, it's cheap. So once I had the MDF, the next part was to lay out the measurements, the size and the shape of the shield, how big I wanted it, and it has to be the same shape as the original shield from the movie that I'm making the impression based on. And so basically I pulled up a bunch of photos on Google, looked at the shape, and I really have no way to help you with this part, and for that I'm sorry, but obviously you don't have a printer large enough to print out a big ass template so you can draw the shape onto your MDF. You're just going to have to get photos, a ruler, tape measure, a compass, markers, and just measure it and draw it out until you get the right shape. Now looking at the photos, I knew the shield had a convex or concave depending on which way the shield's facing and who's looking at it. And so I needed a way to take this flat piece of MDF and put a fold into it. So I simply strapped it to an A-frame ladder using ratchet straps and a couple of weights and just applied a heat gun to it. Apply the heat, go back out there an hour later, apply some more heat, cinch the straps down, and I did this for about a day. The next problem I had is where to get a star. I needed 3 stars, 2 of them the same size, the one in the center larger, and I needed it in a stencil type format. So I simply got out the X-Acto knife and the ruler, made some stars by hand. I printed up a few stars off the internet just to get the right dimensions and to kind of trace it, and then I expanded it using my ruler, and I made my 3 stars. Now in order to use these stars, I had to have a way to apply them to the blank shield that I'd already painted white with the primer so that they'll stick on there and I could paint the blue paint over them. So I simply took my piece of paper that I drew my stencil on, laid the paper on top some blue painter's tape I laid out on my workbench, And so when I cut the star out of the paper, it cut the blue painter's tape below it, thus making an adhesive stencil made from painter's tape, and that's what I use to apply the stencils to the shield. Next, I simply used the same blue painter's tape, got some newspaper, taped off the bottom of the shield, and spray painted the top of the shield with the same flat blue paint that I had used on the M1 helmet. The final step took a little bit of planning. I needed the stripes to be in the right location of the shield, and they all had to be the same width, because you're going to have red stripes on a white background, and if they're slightly angled, different widths, it's going to stand out. So the first thing I did was I got out a pencil, and I measured the shield, and I found the center, and I drew a center line on the shield. And then I measured the width off of that center line, and I figured out to make the stripe that I need about 2.5 inches. It's going to vary depending on the size of your shield. Once I had the center line down, I simply just repeated the width throughout the rest of the shield until I ran out of material. And then I took out more blue painter's tape, and I covered the lines that are going to be white. And with the white stripes being covered with tape, the last step is to simply apply multiple layers of the red paint. It is very important to give the paint plenty of time to dry. Otherwise, this whole project is a huge waste of time, because when you start to remove that painter's tape, if there's any damp paint, it's going to want to pull off with the tape. So be patient, give the thing time to dry, and use your X-Acto knife to pull up the painter's tape and slowly remove all the tape off of the shield so you can see the final product.